don't even know whether I'm going to upload this video, but I want to say something about it because it's been on my mind for a while, and I wouldn't normally do this type of video. I mainly try and keep it light and fun and entertaining on this channel, but it's just been on my mind for a while, and I felt the need to voice where my head's at. So recently, a creator that you guys might know, Davis, made a video saying, "I'm out, brackets, kill Doctor Who," in which he says his reason for not wanting to continue with the show anymore. Which, by the way, is a completely fine thing. If you don't want to carry on watching Doctor Who, that's perfectly fine. You know, it's up to you, you know, live your life. And I want to say, before we get into this, that I'm not a neutral observer in this video, to be clear. Myself and the creator in question have known each other for a few years, and we were friends for quite some time. But through a sequence of events and back and forths on Twitter, we kind of fell out. I don't really want to go into too much depth about it because fundamentally I don't want to make a content creator drama video. I kind of want to use this as a broader time to kind of establish my approach to critiquing Doctor Who and where I think it goes too far, where the line is in critiquing Doctor Who and critiquing any form of media. And obviously, I'm not saying that this has to be everyone's, but for me, I'm explaining why the way that, at least in this video and on Twitter more recently, the way Davis is acting, at least for me, is highly, unpalatable in terms of criticism of media in general. So the premise of the video is essentially that the Interstellar Song Contest was the breaking point for him in Doctor Who. Essentially, the idea is that it is too neoliberal and centrist, and it tries to both sides the idea of, you know, a genocide survivor trying to get justice. Now, there's a lot of depth of feeling about this episode, and actually, I had a very interesting discussion about this episode that really did kind of, you know, give me new insight into the episode as a whole and why people don't feel that it reflected these issues well. I have my own arguments as to where I think the episode worked and didn't work, but that's not really what this video is about. I'm basically just using that as a means to give context. What this video is about is the way that we talk about creators and how we should act towards them. And how, in my opinion, there is a very fine line between criticism and just vitriol. There's a fine line between those two, and I'm not going to pretend like I fully always held that line. I'll be completely honest. But I like to believe that whenever I criticise Doctor Who, it doesn't come from a place of personal vindictiveness towards a person. And unfortunately, I do think that the creator in question has fallen into that a few times. The main example of this is, obviously, within this video, obviously he's talking about, you know, not covering the show anymore, which again, I reiterate, is completely within his rights to do. And he says, essentially, Juno Dawson is an industry bully.
Juno Dawson and Benjamin Cook are weird industry bullies with no values.
And he also mentions another person by the name of Ben Cook, who has been fairly controversial on the Doctor Who side of Twitter for a while now, and I don't really want to relitigate all of that, but I can at least understand where he's coming from with Ben Cook. With Juno Dawson, I have no idea why you would say this. I don't know why you would just randomly claim that someone is an industry bully with no evidence. For me, that's where it stops being legitimate criticism of a piece of work and starts being personal and starts being something that crosses a line, at least for me. And it's not only, you know, Juno Dawson that he does this with. He's done it with Russell as well, you know, calling him senile and stuff. And look, you can hate this current era of Doctor Who, that's fine. But whenever I'm criticising a piece of work, there's a baseline level of respect that I give to anyone who worked on it and benefit of the doubt, shall we say. A good example, obviously, is Chris Chibnall. You guys know I'm not a big fan of the Chris Chibnall era of Doctor Who. But when I criticised it, I was very careful never to kind of bring the man into it too much. Obviously, I'm not advocating for a death of the author approach here. I do think that the values of the author are relevant to any of their work. However, that's why I said the benefit of the doubt thing. Because if we want to talk about, morally questionable Doctor Who moments, and if you want to say that this scene is as morally questionable as it gets, then I think a comparison I can draw is the scene in Spyfall Part 2 where the Doctor sells out the Master to the Nazis. A very, very dodgy scene that I feel like we've all collectively clowned on and said, that was a bit weird. That sentence, however, when I criticise it, doesn't extend beyond that. It doesn't extend to, therefore I think Chris Chibnall is an evil man who believes that using race to gain an advantage over an opponent is a good thing. Because that would be ridiculous. I think it's much more likely, and as I said, giving the benefit of the doubt fair, to say that he wrote a scene not realising how it would come across on broadcast. At least that's how it seems to me. I then also wouldn't continue that statement with saying anyone who enjoys Spyfall Part 2 also likes the idea of using race against someone in order to gain an advantage in a conflict. However, that is effectively what Davis and others have been doing. They've effectively been saying that if you enjoy or in any way defend the recent Doctor Who episode, the Interstellar Song Contest, then you are a genocide apologist. And I feel like I'm going crazy because I'm told that this is how the fandom always was. But for me, there were always lines there. Even if I thought an episode was morally questionable, morally dubious, I would never say that the people in question were evil or that the people who enjoyed anything about it were evil. And I just think that where's that baseline level of decency gone? Where's that baseline level of respect gone? And I don't even just mean respect in terms of, oh, well, he's the Doctor Who showrunner, you have to respect him. No, I mean just as a human. I give basic benefit of the doubt and, basic respect to any person whose work I'm talking about. Hence why I would never claim what I just, pontificated about Chris Chibnall, because frankly it would make me look ridiculous. And I think to me, it's quite rich to claim the moral high ground over other people when you yourself are engaging in vitriol towards others and don't seem to have any level of remorse for that as an action. Is it the worst thing you can do in the world? No, there's probably way worse things, of course. But I just find it ironic that you want to sit there and say that, it's a moral issue to call this episode out. Meanwhile, you're totally fine with calling a writer, and the first trans writer on the programme, I might add, a industry bully with no evidence. That's wild to me. And I don't think that's any better than the vitriol that is espoused by right-wing grifters. Frankly, even if your intent is not to be that, which I don't think it is in Davis's case, you are functionally doing the exact same thing. And I think it makes the point that you're trying to make in this video, that this was your red line and that you stand with the people of Palestine, feel all the more hollow, frankly, because it's obvious that your reasons for this go deeper than just a moral disagreement with the episode. It's obvious that you do feel a certain way to a lot of members of the production team, which, if that's how you feel, that's how you feel. I'm not going to stop it. But just as I said in the beginning of this video that I am not a neutral observer, you can't claim to be a neutral observer either. You just can't. And again, I feel like I'm going to get people saying that, oh, this is just because, you like this era, or you're giving him, free reign where you wouldn't give others. As I said, I would never, claim that Chris Chibnall was some kind of evil man because of the Spyfall Part 2 scene. Because I think that's ridiculous. And I would never claim that anyone who likes Spyfall Part 2 is an evil monster. Because I also think that that is ridiculous. And the reason I use that specific example is because, like with what the Interstellar Song Contest is gesturing towards, both are very real-world, kind of allegories. In fact, in Spyfall Part 2's case, it's a lot closer to reality. The other thing he says in this video that I find quite funny is basically saying that Doctor Who is an evil neoliberal show that is like corporate camp. And then he says to binge Attack on Titan.
Doctor Who is evil establishment camp. And this was a sad little love letter. Watch Love, Death and Robots. Binge Attack on Titan.
And I sort of have to laugh because if you know anything about the views of the man who created Attack on Titan, it's just a pretty funny thing to recommend when you're signalling your disapproval of creatives who work on Doctor Who, quite frankly. I think fundamentally, in my view, Doctor Who is a show that's always covered political topics. That's not, a revolutionary statement. But it's always been a show that there's always kind of had moments where it's got them wrong, or at the very least been muddled in execution. Whether it be the Doctor telling a kid not to take their meds in the forest of the night, or Rose telling a kid to go back to their abusive father in Idiot's Lantern, or any number of the expanded pieces of media that are really dodgy. I don't think it's fair to tar the whole show with that brush. And I mean, if this was the one step too far for you, that's fine. I just find it odd to say that this version of Doctor Who is neoliberal evil camp when there have been episodes and moments throughout Doctor Who history that are just as questionable, if not more so, that you continue to be fine with and continue to be fine with supporting the show. So, to be clear, my argument isn't that he's never signalled dislike of these scenes. I know for a fact that he has. The point that I'm making is that I find it interesting that these scenes have always kind of existed in the show before, and it hasn't led you to tarring the whole show or that specific era as evil, whereas now, when it happens in this era, an era where you've already kind of demonstrated you have a dislike towards the production team, it is now objectively evil, and it is beyond any form of saving or benefit of the doubt. Maybe I'm just too naive. Maybe I give humans and all writers too much of the benefit of the doubt, more benefit of the doubt than they deserve, more license to say what they want to say than maybe is what you think is warranted. But I just think that there's a line between I think that this episode's message was poorly handled, or I don't like this era of Doctor Who, and the people who work on it are evil monsters. I think there's a line there, and for me, that's where I draw it. The line is, I don't call the people who work on Doctor Who evil, unless they do something truly, truly despicable. You have to look at intent as well, and I'm obviously aware that intent doesn't necessarily absolve any individual piece of work of its problematic elements, for sure. As I said, I don't think Chris Chibnall intended how that scene in Spyfall Part 2 came across. But that's why I don't sit there and say that Chris Chibnall's evil, because the intent clearly wasn't how it comes across. Equally, I don't think I can say in good faith that the intent of the Interstellar Song Contest was to make the idea of fighting for justice for people who've survived genocide is somehow evil. Like, I don't think that that's the reading you're supposed to take away from the Interstellar Song Contest. I mean, it might help in Davis's case if he actually watched the episode he's enraged about, but I digress. It's up to him if he doesn't want to. But frankly, using an episode of Doctor Who as a means to act morally superior towards others and basically say that anyone who enjoys it is a genocide apologist comes across as mean-spirited and incredibly performative. And yeah, that's what I've got to say on it. I want to make very clear that I haven't always handled this situation correctly, either with Davis and the way that I've interacted with him and his kind of views on Doctor Who in the current era or whatever, but also just in general. Sometimes I can be reactionary, particularly on Twitter, and I will own up to that, and I will say that that is a fault of mine that I need to work on, and I appreciate that I don't always get it right. But I'm willing to say when I think I get it wrong. I guess what I hope to achieve from this is just to have an open dialogue about how we actually talk about creatives and the ways in which we communicate with our media. Feel free to disagree, feel free to agree. I want to make clear, I don't want you guys going over to Davis's channel, Davis's videos. He already claims that anyone who disagrees with him on this stuff is a secret agent sent by me. So I want to make very clear now, don't go over there, don't engage, don't try and shout him down. He said his piece, I've said mine, we'll leave it there.